Powerful drug lord goes undercover at a university and falls for his professor. Hey there, I'm Alex, your guide through today's extraordinary tale on Hearts of Crime. What you're about to witness is a story of passion and danger that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Trust me, when I say the twist at the end will leave you absolutely speechless. If you enjoy these forbidden love stories, please hit that like button and drop a comment below sharing your thoughts. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our daily uploads of these incredible stories. Stay with me until the very end. I promise the conclusion will shock you in ways you can't imagine. So sit back, relax, and enjoy today's episode. Have a wonderful day, and may God bless you and your family. Blood trickled down Dominic Palmer's knuckles as he wiped them clean with a monogrammed handkerchief. The warehouse fell silent, except for the muffled whimpers of the man curled up on the concrete floor. Next time you think about skimming from my supply, remember this conversation, Dominic said, his voice eerily calm. He adjusted his tailored suit and nodded to his security detail. Clean this up. The morning sun cast long shadows as Dominic's Bentley glided through the gates of his waterfront estate. Another day, another reminder delivered to those who forgot who ruled the city's underworld. Yet something felt hollow. Dominic had built his empire from nothing, clawing his way up from the streets to become the most feared drug distributor in the region. Money, power, respect. He had it all. So why did everything feel so predictable? His phone buzzed. An encrypted message from his lawyer. Federal task force mobilizing, your name mentioned, time for contingencies. Dominic swore under his breath. He'd paid good money to keep federal attention away from his operation. Someone had talked. The contingency plan had been in place for years, a carefully constructed alternate identity, complete with impeccable documentation, the perfect disappearing act. But Dominic Palmer didn't run. He adapted. Prepare the university documents, he instructed his most trusted advisor later that day. It was time for Mr. Diego Parker to pursue higher education. Professor Grace Underwood tapped her pen impatiently against her desk as students filtered into her criminal psychology lecture hall. The morning caffeine hadn't kicked in yet, and the prospect of teaching Introduction to Criminal Psychology to another batch of disinterested undergraduates filled her with a familiar weariness. At 35 minutes past the hour, the door at the back of the lecture hall opened once more. Grace looked up, ready to deliver her practiced late arrival stare, but the words caught in her throat. The man who entered moved with unusual confidence, older than her typical students, with sharp features and intense eyes that surveyed the room like someone assessing threats. He wore a simple button-down shirt and dark jeans that somehow looked more expensive than they should. When he found a seat at the back of the hall, several students instinctively shifted away. Grace cleared her throat and began her lecture on psychological profiles of organized crime figures. The successful career criminal, particularly those who rise to positions of leadership, typically demonstrates a fascinating combination of traits, she explained, clicking through to a slide. Intelligence, certainly. Charisma, almost always. But most importantly, an ability to compartmentalize emotions and rationalize actions that most would find morally reprehensible. She noticed the late arrival watching her with unusual focus, the ghost of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. These individuals aren't born criminals, Grace continued. They reshaped by circumstances, opportunities, and choices. Understanding their psychology isn't about excusing their behavior. It's about recognizing the humanity behind the monster we create in our minds. Something flashed across the man's face. Recognition, perhaps, or disagreement. Grace felt an unexpected chill. For a moment it was as if she were being studied rather than doing the studying. After class, as students packed up their belongings, the mysterious late arrival approached her desk. "Professor Underwood," he said, his voice unexpectedly cultured. "Diego Parker, I've just transferred into your class." Up close, Grace noticed the faint scar running along his jawline and the calculating intelligence behind his eyes. His handshake was firm but controlled, like someone consciously moderating their strength. "Mr. Parker," she replied, "you missed the first 20 minutes of class. That is not how you make a good first impression." "I apologize. I had an unavoidable prior commitment. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. I assure you, I am very interested in what you have to teach about criminal minds. And why is that? Grace found herself asking, curiosity overriding her usual professional distance. Diego looked at her for a long moment before answering. Let's just say, I have a personal interest in understanding why people cross certain lines. Dominic, now Diego, settled into his penthouse apartment near campus. The transition had been smoother than expected. University administration proved remarkably accommodating to a mature student with impeccable credentials and a generous alumni donation. His new identity felt like a well-tailored suit, comfortable but still requiring conscious adjustment. Diego Parker, independently wealthy business consultant pursuing a midlife educational passion, a cover perfect enough to withstand scrutiny, yet flexible enough to explain any unusual behavior. His phone rang. His real phone, not the prop smartphone he carried as Diego. The feds raided the downtown warehouse, his lieutenant reported. They found nothing, as expected, but they re-interviewing everyone connected to Palmer imports. And our friend in the department? Says they have a confidential informant, someone close. Dominic's jaw tightened. Find them. He moved to the window, looking out at the university campus sprawled below. His empire could run itself for a while with the right oversight. This educational diversion was meant to be a convenient cover, a temporary vanishing act until the federal heat dissipated. What he hadn't counted on was Professor Grace Underwood. The irony wasn't lost on him. A drug lord sitting in a criminal psychology class, being lectured on his own psychological profile by a woman who had no idea who she was really addressing. But beyond the irony was something unexpected. Respect. She was smart, insightful, challenging in ways he hadn't anticipated, and beautiful in that understated academic way that seemed unaware of its own appeal. Diego opened his laptop and pulled up the research paper requirements for her class. The assignment, analyze a historical crime figure's psychological motivations and pathology. He smiled to himself as he began typing. Subject, the psychology of power and territory in organized crime leadership. Perhaps he'd write what he knew. Grace sat in her office, Diego Parker's paper open on her tablet. She'd read it 3 times now, each time more disturbed than before. The analysis was brilliant, unnervingly so. The insights into the mind of a fictional drug kingpin showed a depth of understanding that went beyond academic research. The descriptions of how territory was established, how loyalty was enforced, how public and private personas were maintained, it read like a confession disguised as academic exercise. A knock at her door startled her. Professor Underwood, do you have a moment? Diego stood in her doorway, that same controlled presence she'd noticed the first day. Mr. Parker, I was just reviewing your paper. And? Something in his eyes suggested he already knew her thoughts. It's disturbingly insightful. Your fictional subject feels remarkably authentic. He sat down opposite her desk without waiting for an invitation. Fiction often draws from reality. Isn't that what makes good analysis? The level of detail suggests more than casual research. Diego leaned forward slightly. I take my assignment seriously. Clearly. Grace closed her tablet. Which raises a question. Why is someone like you, successful, established, clearly intelligent, really taking an introductory criminal psychology course? For a moment, his carefully constructed mask slipped. Grace glimpsed something raw beneath. Calculation, yes, but also genuine interest. Maybe I'm trying to understand something about myself, he said finally. Isn't that why anyone studies psychology? Their eyes locked, and Grace felt that same strange electricity she'd experienced during their first encounter. There was danger here, she sensed, though she couldn't articulate why. There is a departmental reception tomorrow evening, she heard herself saying. Guest lecturers from the FBI Behavioral Science Unit. Might interest someone with your perspectives. Are you inviting me, Professor? Professionally speaking, yes. His smile was genuine this time. Then professionally speaking, I accept. After he left, Grace stared at the closed door. Professional boundaries existed for a reason. She knew that. Yet something about Diego Parker compelled her attention in ways that went beyond academic interest. Little did she know that across campus, in his luxurious apartment, Dominic Palmer was receiving news that would shatter both their worlds. The FBI had a new lead in their investigation, a professor specializing in criminal psychology, believed to have unwittingly gathered crucial evidence through her research on local organized crime networks. Her name? Dr. Grace Underwood. The departmental reception buzzed with academic energy. Professors in blazers with elbow patches, graduate students trying too hard to impress, and a handful of FBI agents who looked uncomfortable in their business casual attire. Grace smoothed down her dress, a rare departure from her usual professional wardrobe, and scanned the room. She spotted Diego the moment he entered. Unlike the others who moved awkwardly through the social minefield of academia, he navigated the room with natural authority. He wore a charcoal suit that looked custom-tailored, simple yet elegant, in a way that made the FBI agent's government-issue attire look shabby by comparison. "Professor Underwood," he greeted her, offering a glass of wine. "You look different outside the lecture hall." "As do you, Mr. Parker." She accepted the glass, their fingers brushing momentarily. "Though I suspect you comfortable in any environment." A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Adaptation is a survival skill. Indeed, one that certain criminal elements excel at." His eyes flickered with something, amusement, caution, before he gestured toward a group across the room. "I believe those are your FBI guests. They keep looking this way." Grace turned to see Agent Marcus Holloway watching them with unconcealed interest. "Agent Holloway is leading a task force on organized crime in the city. He has been consulting with our department." "Fascinating," Diego said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "And what insights have you provided to the FBI, Professor?" Before she could answer, Holloway approached. "Dr. Underwood." He nodded, then turned a scrutinizing gaze to Diego. "I don't believe we've met." "Diego Parker. I am one of Professor Underwood's students." "A student?" Holloway's eyebrow raised. "You seem a bit mature," Diego supplied. "I am pursuing education later in life. Better late than never, wouldn't you agree, Agent?" Holloway, FBI behavioral analysis. The two men sized each other up with the practiced casualness of predators recognizing each other's territory. Grace felt the tension crackle between them. "Mr. Parker wrote an exceptional analysis on psychological profiles of organized crime leadership," she said, breaking the silence. Holloway's interest visibly sharpened. "Is that so? I'd be interested in reading it." "It was purely academic," Diego said smoothly. "Nothing that would help catch real criminals, I'm afraid." "You'd be surprised what insights can be valuable," Holloway replied. "Sometimes the most theoretical perspectives shed light on practical investigations." Diego took a sip of his drink. "And what investigations currently occupy the FBI's attention in our fair city?" "I'm afraid that classified." Holloway's smile did not reach his eyes. "Though Professor Underwood has been an invaluable resource in understanding certain organizational structures, we re-investigating." Diego turned to Grace, his expression unreadable. "Tarsi, you never mentioned you were consulting for the FBI. There is a lot about my work I don't discuss in class, Mr. Parker." The conversation was interrupted by the department chair calling for attention to introduce the guest speakers. As the crowd shifted, Diego leaned closer to Grace. "I find myself curious about what other secrets you might keep, Professor." His voice was low, meant only for her. "Perhaps we could continue this discussion over dinner sometime." Grace knew she should refuse. Professional boundaries existed for a reason. Yet the words that came out were, "Perhaps we could." Across the room, Agent Holloway watched their interaction with narrowed eyes. Later that night, Dominic paced his penthouse, his Diego Parker persona temporarily shed like an uncomfortable coat. The FBI's presence at the university wasn't a coincidence. They were closing in, using Grace's research to build their case. His phone rang. "Report," he answered curtly. "We found the leak," his lieutenant said. "One of the distributors on the east side. He has been talking to the feds for months. Handle it quietly." "Already done. But there is something else." The FBI agent leading the investigation, Holloway, he is building a RICO case. Word is he has got a witness who can connect all the pieces. Dominic's mind raced. Who? Don't know yet. Someone close to the operation. Maybe someone who doesn't even realize what they know. The conversation with Holloway replayed in his mind. Professor Underwood has been an invaluable resource in understanding certain organizational structures. Could Grace be the unwitting witness they planned to use? The thought created an unexpected pang of, what concern? For her or for himself? Find out exactly what the FBI knows and who they're replanning to use, and get me everything on Agent Holloway. He ended the call and moved to the window, looking out at the city lights. His empire sprawled below, invisible yet omnipresent. For the first time in years, he felt the cold finger of uncertainty trace his spine. Grace Underwood was becoming both a liability and a fascination. The smart play would be to distance himself, perhaps even withdraw from the university entirely. Yet the thought of walking away from her classroom, from the challenge she represented, created a resistance he hadn't anticipated. His phone buzzed with a message, an address and a time. The weekly meeting with his lieutenants couldn't to be postponed, even for a federal investigation. Dominic Palmer needed to make an appearance, if only briefly. Diego Parker would have to wait. Grace couldn't sleep. The interaction between Diego and Agent Holloway kept replaying in her mind. There had been something in the way they regarded each other, a recognition that went beyond the normal awkwardness between academic and law enforcement worlds. Her laptop glowed in the darkness of her bedroom as she pulled up Diego's paper again. The insights were too precise, the details too nuanced. It read like an insider's perspective. On impulse, she opened a browser and searched Diego Parker Business Consultant. The results showed a perfectly crafted digital footprint, a LinkedIn profile, mentions in business journals, even a quote in a Wall Street Journal article from 2 years ago. All impeccable, yet somehow too perfect. She tried variations of his name, searching for older references. Nothing before 3 years ago. It was as if Diego Parker had simply materialized out of thin air with a fully formed professional identity. A notification popped up on her screen. A new email from Agent Holloway, Dr. Underwood. I'd like to discuss your student, Mr. Parker. Something about his insights concerns me. Are you available tomorrow morning? Holloway. Grace stared at the message, her unease growing. What had Holloway sensed that she had missed? Or was he seeing something that wasn't there? She closed her laptop without replying and tried to sleep, but her dreams were troubled by shadowy figures and the intense gaze of a student who seemed to know too much about the criminal mind. The abandoned warehouse on the docks had served as Dominic Palmer's unofficial headquarters for years. His security team swept the location before each meeting, ensuring no surveillance devices or unwanted visitors. His lieutenants waited nervously as he entered. They knew the federal heat was increasing, and in their world, pressure often led to fatal mistakes. The distribution network shifts east beginning next week, Dominic instructed, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. New routes, new drop points. The details are in your secure packets. What about our friends in the department? Asked one lieutenant. With the feds involved, our usual protection might not hold. Already handled. As long as everyone maintains discipline, this federal interest will pass. Dominic's tone made it clear the subject was closed. Now what as the status on our pharmaceutical expansion? The meeting proceeded efficiently until a commotion outside interrupted them. One of his security men burst in. Boss, we've got company. Multiple vehicles approaching. Looks federal. Dominic remained calm while his lieutenants panicked. Contingency plan echo. Go. The room erupted into controlled chaos as his people scattered, taking different exit routes while hard drives were wiped and documents destroyed. Dominic himself moved toward a hidden exit, but paused as his security chief approached with a tablet. Sir, the surveillance feed. I think you should see this. The screen showed Agent Holloway directing the operation outside, but it was the person next to him that made Dominic's blood run cold. Grace Underwood stood beside the FBI agent, pointing toward the warehouse. Grace had never intended to get involved in an FBI raid. Her meeting with Holloway that morning had been purely academic, discussing patterns she'd observed in local criminal organizations through her research interviews. "This organizational structure you've mapped," Holloway had said, pointing to her diagram, "matches perfectly with what we believe is the Palmer operation." Palmer? The name wasn't a TT familiar to her. Dominic Palmer. He runs the largest drug distribution network in the region, though we've never been able to directly connect him to it, until now. Holloway looked pleased with himself. "Your research has helped us identify a location we believe serves as his command center. I'm glad my academic work has practical applications," Grace said carefully. "But I don't see how theoretical organizational models translate to a specific location. Combined with our confidential informant S information, it's given us what we need." Holloway checked his watch. "In fact, we're moving on the location today. Would you care to observe? It might provide valuable insight for your research." Grace should have declined. Instead, professional curiosity led her to the docks, standing beside Holloway as FBI tactical teams prepared to raid the warehouse. "Stay behind me," Holloway instructed as they approached the building after the initial entry team had secured it. "This is just a courtesy visit. The real action is probably over." The warehouse appeared empty when they entered, though evidence of a hasty departure was everywhere. Chairs still warm, a coffee cup still steaming. The FBI teams moved methodically through the space, documenting everything. "They were tipped off," Holloway muttered, frustration evident. "Someone knew we were coming." Grace wandered a few steps away, taking in the scene. A criminal gathering interrupted, just like the scenarios she discussed in her lectures. Something on a table caught her eye, a handkerchief, monogrammed with the initials DP. DP. Diego Parker? No, that was absurd. Diego was her student, not a criminal. Yet the doubt had planted itself. "Find anything interesting, Professor?" Grace startled at Holloway's voice behind her. She hesitated only a moment before handing him the handkerchief. "This might belong to someone important. The monogram suggests a certain vanity." Holloway examined it. "DP. Not our primary target, but worth checking." He bagged the evidence. "Thank you for your assistance today, Professor. I have a feeling we were getting closer to connecting all the pieces." As they left the warehouse, Grace could not shake the feeling that she had crossed a line from academic observer to active participant in the pursuit of criminals who, until now, had been merely theoretical subjects in her research. And somewhere in that transition, Diego Parker's face kept appearing in her mind. The gallery opening was crowded with the city's elite, old money mingling uncomfortably with tech millionaires, artists, and the socialites who followed them all. Under normal circumstances, Dominic would have avoided such public exposure, but these weren't normal circumstances. The art world provided excellent money laundering opportunities, and maintaining his cover required Diego Parker to make appropriate social appearances. More importantly, he needed to assess Grace Underwood outside the university context, to determine what she knew and who she was really working with. He spotted her by a large abstract canvas, looking somewhat out of place in the pretentious crowd. She wore a simple black dress that flattered her figure without trying too hard, so different from the calculated sexuality of the women who usually surrounded him. "The artist claims it represents urban decay and renewal," Diego said, approaching her with 2 champagne flutes. "I think it looks like someone spilled paint." Grace accepted the champagne with a small smile. "Diego, I didn't expect to see you here." "I am a patron of the arts, or at least I pretend to be when the occasion calls for it." He gestured around the gallery. "And you? Do you often frequent gallery openings?" "The artist is a friend of a friend. I promised to make an appearance." She studied him over her glass. "But I suspect you already knew that, didn't you?" The directness of her question caught him off guard. "What makes you say that?" "You don't strike me as a man who leaves much to chance, Mr. Parker." She turned to face the painting again. 3 days ago, I accompanied Agent Holloway to a warehouse raid. Someone left in a hurry, leaving behind a monogrammed handkerchief with the initials DP. Diego maintained his composure. "DP is fairly common. Daniel Phillips, David Pratt, Dominic Palmer." Her voice was soft but clear. The target of Holloway's investigation. For a dangerous moment, Dominic considered his options: denial, distraction, disappearance. In his world, loose ends were typically handled permanently, yet the thought of treating Grace as a problem to be solved created an unexpected resistance. Instead, he chose calculated honesty. Interesting theory, Professor. What else does your psychological analysis tell you? That you were too intelligent to confirm or deny anything, that you reassessing how much I know versus how much I suspect. She turned to face him fully. And that you were trying to decide if I am a threat. Their eyes locked in silent confrontation, the noisy gallery fading into the background. You've been consulting with the FBI, he said finally. Are you wearing a wire right now, Professor? Would it matter if I was? Immensely. His voice dropped lower. It would mean you've already made your decision about who I am. Grace set down her champagne glass. I make decisions based on evidence, not suspicion. Right now all I have are questions. Ask them. She hesitated, then, who are you really, Diego? Or should I call you something else? Diego is fine for now. He guided her toward a quieter corner of the gallery. What else do you want to know? Are you using my class for some purpose I don't understand? I enrolled in your class for legitimate reasons. My interest in your subject matter is genuine. And your interest in me? The question hung between them, dangerous and electric. Diego stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head up to maintain eye contact. That was unexpected, a complication I didn't anticipate. Is that what I am? A complication? You have no idea, he murmured, then made a decision he suspected he might regret. Have dinner with me tomorrow night, not as student and professor, not as subject and researcher, just two people with an undeniable connection. That would be crossing a line. I think we both crossed that line the moment you suspected who I might be and still continued this conversation. Grace should have walked away. Everything about this man screamed danger, yet she found herself saying, text me the address. As she left the gallery, Diego watched her go, aware that he was violating his own cardinal rule: never let personal feelings interfere with business. Yet something about Grace Underwood made the risk seem worthwhile. What he didn't see was Agent Holloway, watching them both from across the room, a concerned frown deepening on his face. Sonny sees compromised, Holloway told his team the next morning. Dr. Underwood has developed a personal relationship with our target's alter ego. Do we bring her in? Asked his partner. Holloway considered the options. Not yet. She may not realize who he really is, and if she does know, she might lead us right to him. Put surveillance on her, but keep it discreet. I don't want either of them spooked. And if Palmer realizes we're using her to get to him, the agent's expression darkened, then we'd better be ready to move quickly. Men like Palmer don't leave witnesses when they feel cornered. Across town, Grace sat in her office, staring at a text message with an address and time. Every rational thought told her to cancel, to report her suspicions to Holloway, to retreat to the safety of her academic world. Instead, she found herself researching the restaurant, an exclusive place overlooking the water, the kind that didn't list prices on its menu. She found herself considering what to wear, as if this were a normal date and not a potentially dangerous dance with a man who might be the very criminal she had studied for years. Most disturbingly, she found herself excited by the prospect. Grace had spent her career analyzing the psychology of risk-takers and rule-breakers. She understood the theory of why otherwise intelligent people made self-destructive choices. Now, preparing to meet a man she increasingly suspected led a double life, she was experiencing that psychology firsthand. Perhaps that was the real allure of Diego Parker, or whatever his name truly was. He represented everything she had studied but never experienced: the forbidden knowledge, the walking the edge of danger. The question that haunted her as she prepared for their dinner wasn't whether she should go, but what she would do with the truth once she had it. The restaurant perched on the cliffside, its glass walls offering panoramic views of the ocean below. At night, with the city lights twinkling in the distance, it created an illusion of floating in space, suspended between worlds. A fitting metaphor, Grace thought, for her current situation. Diego was already waiting when she arrived, rising from his table as she approached. He wore no tie, his collar open just enough to suggest relaxation without slipping into casualness. The maitre d' had treated him with the deference reserved for valued regulars. "You look beautiful," Diego said simply as she sat across from him. "You seem comfortable here," Grace observed. "Another aspect of your consulting business. Let us establish some ground rules," he replied, ignoring her gentle probe. "Tonight, no titles. Not professor, not student, no FBI, no investigations, just Diego and Grace having dinner." "Is that possible, to simply set aside who we are?" His smile was tinged with something like regret. For a few hours, perhaps. The sommelier approached with a bottle of wine that Diego had apparently pre-selected. As he performed the ritual of presentation and pouring, Grace studied the man across from her. In this environment, he seemed even further removed from the role of student. His confidence, the subtle way he commanded the space around him, it spoke of someone accustomed to power. "What should we talk about if all the obvious topics are forbidden?" Grace asked after they were alone again. "Tell me something I wouldn't know from your lectures. Something about Grace, not Professor Underwood." She considered this while sipping her wine, an excellent vintage that probably cost more than her weekly salary. "I grew up in a small coastal town. My father was the sheriff. My mother taught high school literature. I was supposed to follow one of their paths, but I became fascinated by what made people break rules rather than enforce or teach them." "The allure of the forbidden," Diego nodded. "A common theme in human psychology. And you? What drew you to the business world, or should I say the world of business consulting?" The emphasis wasn't he lost on him. "Necessity, initially, then aptitude. I discovered I had a talent for seeing systems, how they work, where they vulnerable, how they can be improved or exploited." He held her gaze. "Not so different from your field in many ways. Except I study these systems to understand them. You study them to control them." She hadn't meant to break his rule about tonight's conversation, but the word slipped out. Instead of denying it, Diego leaned forward slightly. "Control is understanding applied to purpose. The difference between us may be less about methodology and more about objectives." The arrival of their appetizers created a brief interlude. When the server departed, Grace found herself asking the question that had haunted her since the gallery. "Why me, Diego? Of all the professors, all the courses you could have taken, why criminal psychology? Why my class?" He considered his answer carefully. Initially, practical value. Knowledge of how law enforcement thinks has obvious benefits in many fields. He traced the rim of his wineglass. "But I stayed because of you, your insight, your passion for understanding rather than judging, the way you see patterns others miss." "Flattery?" "Observation." His expression turned serious. "You're dangerous, Grace Underwood. Not in the way most people understand danger, but in a more fundamental sense. You see beyond surfaces." "Is that why you here tonight? To assess the danger I represent?" "I'm here because, against my better judgment, I find myself wanting you to see me. Really see me." The vulnerability in his admission seemed genuine. Even knowing where that might lead. The main course arrived, perfectly seared scallops for her, rare steak for him. They ate in contemplative silence for a few moments. "I think I've suspected since your first paper," Grace said finally. "The details were too precise, too authentic. Yet you didn't to report your suspicions. Professional curiosity, perhaps. Or maybe I am not immune to the allure of the forbidden either." Diego's phone vibrated on the table. He glanced at it, his expression changing subtly. "Trouble?" Grace asked. "A business matter that requires attention." He signaled for the check. "I apologize for cutting this short." "Your actual business, or the business I suspect you really in?" He met her eyes. "Would the answer change anything between us?" Before she could respond, he continued, "I'd like to show you something, not far from here. It might help you understand. Will you come?" Every instinct honed through years of studying criminal behavior warned Grace to decline. Yet she heard herself say, "Lead the way." Diego's car, an understated luxury sedan with obviously custom features, wound along the coastal road, climbing higher into the exclusive neighborhood overlooking the bay. They drove in silence, the unspoken truths between them filling the space more effectively than conversation. They stopped at a modern mansion, all glass and angles, perched on the cliffside with a commanding view of the city below. Security cameras tracked their approach, and the gate opened automatically as they neared. "Another of your residences?" Grace asked, as they pulled into the curved driveway. "A temporary accommodation." Diego led her to the door, which unlocked with a fingerprint scan. "The owner is traveling abroad for the year." The interior was minimalist luxury, open spaces, museum-quality art, furniture that valued aesthetics over comfort. Diego moved through it with the ease of familiarity, leading her to a wall of windows that showcased the cityscape. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, standing close behind her. "From up here, the city looks orderly, purposeful. You can see the chaos, the desperation, the battles for territory and survival." "Is that how you justify it?" Grace turned to face him. "Viewing everything from a distance? I don't seek justification." His voice remained calm. "I deal in reality. The city you study in theory I understand in practice." He moved to a hidden panel in the wall, revealing a small safe. After entering a code, he removed a flash drive. "This contains evidence of corruption in the police department, judges on payroll, and politicians who look the other way for the right price." He held it out to her. "Also detailed records of Agent Holloway's selective prosecutions and deals with criminals worse than the ones he pursues." Grace stared at the drive without taking it. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you deserve to understand the full picture before you make your choice." "What choice?" "Whether to help Holloway capture Dominic Palmer," he said simply, "or to walk away from this entire situation." The moment hung between them, his indirect admission changing everything and nothing simultaneously. "You readmitting it then," Grace said. "You are Dominic Palmer." "I am many things. That name represents one aspect of a complex reality." He returned the drive to the safe, just as Professor Underwood represents only one aspect of who you are. "The difference being that my other aspects, don't involve criminal enterprises." "Don't they?" He stepped closer. "You were here alone with a man you suspect is responsible for who knows what crimes. Your curiosity, your attraction to danger, aren't those aspects of yourself that exist outside the law-abiding professor." His proximity was intoxicating, the danger and attraction creating a heady combination. Grace knew she should leave, call Holloway, end whatever this was before it went further. Instead, she found herself drawn toward him, the intellectual fascination blurring with physical desire. "This is insane," she whispered. "Quite possibly," he agreed, then closed the remaining distance between them. The kiss was everything she had subconsciously expected, controlled intensity, commanding yet responsive. Grace allowed herself to get lost in it momentarily before pulling back. "I need to think," she said, breathless. "This is too much. Take the night. Consider everything." Dominic stepped back, giving her space. "I'll have my driver take you home." "And tomorrow?" "Tomorrow you will either see me in your classroom as Diego Parker, or you will see my name in the headlines as the FBI makes its arrest." His smile held no humor. "The choice, Professor, is entirely yours." Grace barely slept. The ethical dilemma kept her mind spinning through the night. Her duty as a citizen versus what she now recognized as deeper feelings for a man who operated outside the law. By morning, she was no closer to a decision. Her phone rang as she poured her first cup of coffee. Agent Holloway. "Dr. Underwood, we're moving on Palmer today. I need to know if you had any contact with Diego Parker in the last 24 hours. Her heart raced. "Why do you ask?" "Because we have reason to believe he is not who he claims to be." Holloway's voice was tight with suppressed excitement. "DNA from that handkerchief you found? It is a partial match to evidence from a case involving Dominic Palmer from years ago. Not conclusive, but enough for a warrant. You think Diego Parker is Dominic Palmer? That seems far-fetched." The lie felt strange on her lips. "We've been monitoring his movements. He had dinner with you last night, then took you to a property we believe serves as one of his safe houses." A cold feeling washed over her. "You've been watching me." "For your protection," Holloway insisted. "Men like Palmer eliminate liabilities. You could have been in danger. I need to go, Agent Holloway. I have a class to prepare for. Grace, wait. She ended the call, her decision suddenly clear. Not from any romantic notion, but from the realization that Holloway had used her as bait, putting her at risk without her knowledge or consent. Whatever moral high ground he claimed had just crumbled beneath him. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Class or headlines? She replied without hesitation. Class. But we need to talk. Diego arrived at her lecture hall early, looking as composed as ever despite the circumstances. Only the intensity in his eyes betrayed any sense of urgency. Holloway called, Grace said without preamble. They are moving today. He knows who you are. I assumed as much. I have contingencies in place. Running again? Creating another identity? He studied her face. That depends on several factors, including your decision. Before she could respond, students began filtering in. Their conversation would have to wait. As Grace prepared her materials, she noticed Agent Holloway slip into the back of the lecture hall, accompanied by two plainclothes officers. Today we'll discuss the psychology of moral relativism in criminal behavior, she began, hyper-aware of Diego sitting calmly in the front row and Holloway watching from the back. The fascinating grey area where societal rules conflict with personal codes of ethics. She lectured on autopilot, her mind racing with the knowledge that she was essentially serving as the bait in a trap. Holloway wouldn't move until after class, not wanting to create a scene. That gave them, approximately 45 minutes. Consider this scenario, she continued, making a decision. A criminal enterprise led by an intelligent, ruthless figure. Law enforcement pursues this individual relentlessly, yet fails to recognize that the systems enabling his crimes, corruption, poverty, selective enforcement, are perpetuated by the very institutions claiming to fight those crimes. Diego's eyebrow raised slightly. From the back, Holloway shifted uncomfortably. In such a scenario, where does true moral culpability lie? With the individual who exploits a broken system, or with the system itself, which creates the conditions for exploitation? Grace made eye contact with Diego. Mr. Parker, you had some interesting insights on this in your last paper. Would you care to elaborate? Diego recognized the opportunity she was creating. I believe moral relativism suggests that individual actions must be judged within context. A man stealing bread to feed his family is different from one stealing for greed, though the act itself is identical. And how does this apply to more serious offenses? Grace pressed. Distribution of illegal substances, for instance. One might argue that when legal systems fail to provide equal protection or opportunity, alternative economies inevitably emerge, Diego said carefully. The individuals who rise to power in these alternative systems are often responding to market demands unfulfilled by legitimate channels. Fascinating perspective. Grace noticed Holloway whispering to his colleagues. This reminds me of a case study I wanted to share with the class. Unfortunately, I left the materials in my office. Mr. Parker, would you mind accompanying me to retrieve them? Your insight might be valuable in preparing the presentation. Diego nodded, understanding. Of course, Professor. As they left the lecture hall through the side door, Grace caught Holloway's expression of alarm. They had minutes at most before he realized what was happening. This way, she said, leading Diego through a maintenance corridor she had discovered years ago when exploring the old building. It bypassed the main hallways, emerging near a service exit that led to the faculty parking area. You've thought this through, Diego observed as they hurried along. Criminal psychology isn't just theoretical for me. They reached her car. Get in. Holloway will have the exits covered soon. Why are you doing this? Diego asked as she drove toward a rarely used service road that circumvented the main campus exits. Because Holloway used me as bait without my knowledge, because the system he represents is as corrupt as what it claims to fight. She glanced at him briefly, and because, against my better judgment, I believe there is more to you than what the FBI wants to prosecute. Sire, they cleared the campus just as Grace's phone began ringing. Holloway, no doubt she ignored it. Where to now? She asked. There is a private airfield 20 miles north. I have arrangements in place. Grace nodded and turned onto the highway. I cannot believe I am doing this. Having second thoughts constantly, but I've made my choice. She accelerated past a slow-moving truck. I am helping you escape. That makes me an accessory. It makes you someone who sees beyond simplistic categories of good and evil. Diego's voice softened. It's why I was drawn to you from the beginning. They drove in tense silence for several miles before Grace asked the question that had been haunting her. What happens after the airfield? You disappear, become someone new, and continue as before? That depends on what you want to happen. What I want. Come with me. The words hung in the air between them, so not as an accessory or a fugitive, as a partner. A partner in what exactly? In creating something new. His expression was earnest. I've been considering an exit strategy for some time. My organization has legitimate businesses, investments that could be separated from the rest. A fresh start somewhere without Dominic Palmer's history or Diego Parker's deception. You expect me to believe you would walk away from your empire, just like that. Or not just like that. It would require careful planning, transferring power to the right people, ensuring stability. He looked out at the passing landscape. But with the right motivation, yes, I believe I could. And I that motivation. Skepticism colored her voice. You represent something I haven't encountered before. Someone who sees me clearly and still chooses to engage rather than judge or exploit. His hand found hers briefly. That is worth more than any empire. Grace wanted to believe him. The academic in her recognized the classic manipulation tactics, the promises of reform criminals often made. Yet another part, the part that had been drawn to him from the beginning, sensed genuine possibility. I need more than words, she said finally. I need proof that change is possible. Then let me show you. He pointed ahead to where a helicopter waited in a clearing just off the highway. Change of plans. The airfield might be compromised. Grace pulled over. The decision point had arrived sooner than expected. Stay, face Holloway, and return to her safe academic life, or step into the unknown with a man whose very identity remained in question. This isn't just about escaping the FBI, she realized aloud. This is a test to see if I'll actually cross that line. It's an opportunity, Diego corrected, for both of us. Grace's phone rang again. Holloway was persistent. This time she answered and put it on speaker. Where are you? Holloway demanded. You re-interfering with a federal investigation. I am making a choice based on all available information, Grace replied calmly, including the fact that you used me as bait without my consent, putting me at risk. He's manipulating you, Grace. Men like Palmer are expert manipulators. And what about men like you, Agent Holloway? Diego interjected. Men who selectively enforce laws based on political expediency, who build cases on the backs of civilians they re-sworn to protect. Parker, or Palmer, or whatever you recalling yourself, this one T end well for you. That remains to be seen. Diego turned to Grace. The choice is still yours. Stay or come with me. Either way, I respect your decision. Grace looked between the phone and the man beside her. The moment crystallized everything she had taught about choice, consequence, and the gray areas of human morality. Agent Holloway, she said finally, I resign from my consulting position with the FBI, effective immediately. My cooperation was voluntary, and I am now withdrawing it. Grace She ended the call and turned to Diego. I'm not coming with you. Not yet. His disappointment was visible, but he nodded in understanding. But I am not helping Holloway either, she continued. I am going to pursue the truth about you, about him, about the whole system, and when I have that truth, I'll make my final decision. How will you find me? Grace smiled slightly. I am rather good at understanding criminal psychology, remember? I'll find you when I am ready. Diego studied her face, then reached into his pocket and pressed a small object into her hand, a secure phone. When you ready, call the only number programmed into this. It will reach me, whatever name I keep using. He leaned in and kissed her once more, gently, with promise rather than passion. Until then, Professor. Grace watched as he walked to the helicopter, his posture straight, his movements unhurried despite the circumstances. The man who had entered her classroom as Diego Parker and who would leave her life, temporarily, as someone else entirely. As the helicopter lifted off, she felt her phone vibrate with another call from Holloway. This time she answered. "He is gone, Agent Holloway. And if you want any further cooperation from me, you will need to be completely transparent about your investigation, including the corners you've cut and the lines you've crossed. And this isn't a negotiation, Dr. Underwood. Actually, it is. I have information you need, but I also have questions that require answers." The silence on the line suggested Holloway was weighing his options. Finally, he said, "My office, 1 hour." Grace ended the call and got back into her car. The helicopter was already a distant speck in the sky. She placed the secure phone in her glove compartment, a tangible connection to a future possibility that both thrilled and terrified her. 6 months later, Grace sat in her office, reviewing student papers. Her life had returned to something resembling normal, though normal had taken on new dimensions. Her experience with Dominic Diego had changed her perspective on her research, on the justice system, and on her own capacity for moral complexity. The investigation into Dominic Palmer had stalled after his disappearance. Holloway had been reassigned following an internal review prompted in part by information Grace had provided about his questionable methods. The criminal organization Palmer had led had fragmented, with some parts continuing operations under new leadership and others transitioning, surprisingly, into legitimate businesses. Grace had kept her promise to herself, digging deeper into both sides of the story. She had interviewed former associates who painted a picture of Palmer as ruthless but principled, a man who enforced strict rules against violence towards civilians and who invested significant resources into the communities where he operated. She had also uncovered evidence of systemic corruption that made Holloway's single-minded pursuit of Palmer seem selective at best, corrupt at worst. The secure phone remained untouched in her desk drawer. She had been tempted many times to call the number, but something held her back. Not fear or moral hesitation, but a sense that the timing wasn't too right, that both she and the man she knew as Diego needed time to evolve beyond their initial connection. A knock at her office door interrupted her thoughts. "Professor Underwood? Your guest has arrived." Her teaching assistant gestured toward the waiting area. Grace wasn't expecting anyone. Curious, she walked to the reception area and froze when she saw who waited. He looked different, his hair longer, his clothing more casual, his bearing somehow lighter. But the eyes were unmistakable. "Professor," he greeted her with a familiar half-smile. "I hope I am not interrupting." "Not at all." Grace maintained her composure despite her racing heart. "My office?" Once the door closed behind them, she turned to him. "You shouldn't be here. It is dangerous." Dominic Palmer is officially dead," he said simply. "A boating accident off the coast of Monaco. Very tragic. The body was never recovered." "And who are you now?" "David Preston, philanthropist, educational consultant, former business executive seeking a meaningful second chapter." He sat comfortably in the chair across from her desk. "I've been busy these past months, so I've heard. The Palmer Foundation's educational initiatives in underprivileged neighborhoods have made quite a splash. You have been keeping tabs on me." Professional curiosity. Grace sat behind her desk, creating a physical barrier between them. "Why are you here? I am fulfilling a promise, showing you that change is possible." He slid a folder across her desk. "You see complete documentation of how the Palmer empire has been dismantled, with legitimate businesses separated and criminal operations shut down. Not overnight and not without complications, but systematically." Grace opened the folder, scanning its contents. "Why would you walk away from everything you built?" "Because some things are worth more." His gaze held hers. "I meant what I said that day. You showed me a perspective I hadn't considered, that there are ways to effect change outside the system I decreated. And now I am applying my talents to different challenges. The foundation is just the beginning." He leaned forward slightly. "But I didn't come just to show you papers. I came to renew my proposal. Partnership, Grace, in whatever form you re comfortable with." The months of separation had given Grace time to process her feelings, to separate the initial attraction of danger from the deeper connection they had formed. She had explored the moral implications from every angle, challenged her own assumptions, and arrived at a place of clarity. "I have conditions," she said finally. "Complete transparency, continued legitimate operations only, and I maintain my position here. My work matters to me." His smile broadened. "Doubt I expected nothing less. This one to be easy," Grace warned. "People will question your transformation, my judgment. Let them question. We know the truth." He stood and extended his hand across the desk. "Partners, Professor Underwood?" Grace rose and took his hand, but instead of shaking it, she pulled him closer. "Partners, Mr. Preston." Their kiss held the promise of a future neither could have imagined when he first walked into her classroom. A future built not on deception or idealized reform, but on the honest acknowledgement of their complex moral landscapes and the choice to navigate them together. Outside her office window, the university campus continued its normal rhythms, students and faculty moving between classes, unaware that within the confines of that small office, two people from vastly different worlds had found common ground in the most unexpected of places. The grey area between right and wrong, between theory and practice, between who they had been and who they might become together. And as David, formerly Dominic, formerly Diego, held her close, Grace realized that sometimes the most dangerous lessons were the ones most worth learning. Wow, I told you that ending would be unexpected. If you enjoyed this story, please give this video a thumbs up and share your reactions in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to Hearts of Crime for more captivating stories, just like this one every single day. Click on the video appearing on your screen right now for another incredible tale of love in the criminal underworld. Thank you for watching until the end. May God bless you and your family, and I'll see you in the next video.